All right, my clock says 10 o'clock, so we'll get started. Good morning, everyone. Once again, my name is Noah Newman, and I'm an editor here at No-Till Farmer. Thanks so much for joining us for today's webinar with Sound Agriculture, Optimizing Soil Health for Profitability. Today's presenters are Jeff Diven. He is the Director of Sales Agronomy at Sound Agriculture. We also have Bob Pulowski, a first-generation New York farmer and a source dealer. They're going to talk to you about how to harness your soil biology with proven strategies and techniques that will boost your bottom line and reduce your reliance on fertilizer. Now, before they get started with the presentation, I have a couple quick housekeeping items I want to tell you about. You might see at the bottom of your screen the Q&A panel there, the Q&A icon. Now, you could submit questions there at any time during the presentation, and at the end of the presentation, we'll go through those questions and have a Q&A session. We're also recording today's session in the event you want to go back and watch it or share it with anyone. That recording will be released shortly after the presentation. So without further ado, let's get started. Jeff and Bob, take it away.
Appreciate that. Thank you. So we'll jump right in here, have plenty to cover in the hour available today, and then we'll get to a nice talk between myself and Bob towards the end. So I'll power through some content here related to the microbiome and spend some time talking about source, and then we'll answer your questions and get into a little bit of a nice dialogue with how Bob has implemented source on his own farm. So looking forward to the talk here. As stated, just put your questions in. We'll save most of them for the end. If there's something that's burning, we'll pause and answer that. But we'll try to power through a lot of this and then get to the conversation, which will be the fun part. Okay, so as we think of soil and specifically microbes, we know they are capable of tons of different processes. So everything from breaking down organic matter to converting atmospheric nitrogen, they are the engine that turns mineral forms of nutrients into plant available forms. And there's tons of them, we know that. But what we don't often talk about is how that relationship with a plant gets going. Is it just coincidence? Is it by chance? Is it always happening? This part of the conversation, I think, is very interesting. And what's unique is that microbes and plants actually start their relationship from a signal. So what this is plants putting out a signal, so a chemical compound that a bacteria or some type of a microbe would respond to out with its root exudates. Without that signal, those two items in the soil don't necessarily find each other and don't begin that bartering process where a plant is trading sugar and energy to a microbe in exchange for plant available forms of nutrients or inorganic forms of nutrients. So this starts naturally in a system where a plant is stressed. It doesn't have a nutrient that it is wanting to flourish and to grow as quickly as it would like. So in a natural system, so natural system just meaning something that's not farmed or influenced by the application of a fertilizer, it's very simple. A plant will use photosynthesis, take in CO2, use the sunlight and convert that to a sugar. 40% of that sugar actually makes its way below ground for both root growth and feeding different soil biology that's associated with the roots. So that's where sometimes when we think of carbon capture and that whole conversation, a lot of that sugar is making its way below ground to help feed the system and support the plant. Why this is important is plants can actually get about 2/3 of a pound per day, or 50 pounds during the season of nitrogen from free-living nitrogen-fixing bacteria. So if those relationships exist, that bacteria is fed with a sugar source, it can actually contribute quite a bit of nitrogen to that plant system. And if we think of something like, a tall grass prairie or a plant that is thriving on its own, it has a nitrogen requirement that's oftentimes met by soil biology. So that's the good news, is that it's very capable of contributing those nutrients, specifically nitrogen, when that engine is up and running. Unfortunately, with some of the modern farming practices, we are putting a lot of nitrogen in and around the root zone and the rhizosphere specifically. So when I talk about microbes, all of the action happens within about 1/8 inch of a living root, which is the rhizosphere. That's really kind of where all these exchanges are taking place. all the nutrient conversions are taking place. If it's further away from a root than that, it's probably not going to impact the plant the way that we want it to. So if you think of what we're doing from a planting perspective with equipment, we're putting nitrogen where? Under the seed, on top of the seed, 2 inches away from the seed, 3 inches away from the seed. We're dribbling it right on top of that planting zone. So what we're actually doing is decreasing the amount of need that plant is feeling and that those microbes and bacteria are feeling. And we reduce the amount of signals that those plants are sending naturally on their own, resulting in microbes that are not contributing to their full potential, especially as it pertains to nitrogen. So there are some opportunities to bring this back into check and back into balance. A lot of this, these are strategies where you may use 1, 2, 3, 4 of these, but there's always an opportunity to get better. And the first sits with soil testing. So inevitably, if we're not trying to overload a specific nutrient or part of the equation, it's best to apply what is needed in any given area. And actually, the over-application of something like synthetic nitrogen can tie up other essential nutrients, potassium, boron, and we get a little bit of unbalance from that perspective. The other thing that we can do is leave kind of that carbon energy source in place. So if we're no-tilling or strip-tilling, we are able to leave a lot of that material. Like I mentioned, about 40% of the sugars produced by a plant end up below ground. We're able to leave that there to feed and energize what biology is left in the soil for the following season. What we're also doing there is leaving intact, mycorrhizal fungi and some of these different opportunities for us to get nutrients from further away from the root source. Putting our nutrients on at the right timing. So if we're putting them in the right place, less prone to loss, we're able to utilize and get the full efficiency out of what we do invest in. Obviously, that investment has gotten high the last couple of years. We want to get as much out of it as we possibly can. And lastly here, living roots. So cover crops, crop rotation, intercropping, any variety of living roots result in different root exudates and these different signals sent down into the microbiome to increase diversity. And we know we want diversity for it to thrive and be as influential as possible. So just a couple of these, if we zoom in on 2 of those items, specifically cover crops. So what we can do with a cover crop is absorb nutrients left in the soil after, a cash crop that just got taken off. The nutrients are much easily taken up a second time after that cover crop would take them up. They decompose. We are really fueling some organic forms of nitrogen and that microbial activity to have a source to not only seek nutrients out, but use them for a second time and not let them be lost to environmental challenges. So great opportunity in cover crops. I've seen it personally on my own farm to drive some yields up with that diversity of availability. So efficient nutrient application, this looks a lot of different ways. This could be anything from split application and spoon feeding nutrients. It could be putting nutrients in a zone with strip till. That's just a picture of me out strip tilling last fall, and putting those nutrients in a band where they're accessible, especially in dry years. There's not a lot of mobility to some of these nutrients that we're applying. So keeping them close to where they're needed. We don't have to rely quite as much on rain to make that movement. And also keep in mind that we find nutrients with roots. Our nutrients don't find our roots. So we need to have that root mass grow into the available forms of fertilizer that's been applied and then feed the microbiome to convert it to usable forms. So it's always interesting. I encourage you in the bottom left here. This is just a tissue sample. I know everybody on this call, or a lot of folks on this call, probably do a great job with soil testing and knowing what's there from a nutrient standpoint. Take a tissue test right on top of a soil test. And I think what you find is pretty interesting. Oftentimes we might think we have sufficient levels of a nutrient in a soil test, but it's not getting into the plant. And then you have to ask yourself why. Why is this nutrient that's in the soil not getting itself into the plant? And that's likely due to an inactive microbiome or not being able to fully convert that mineral form of a nutrient into a plant available form. So that is why we need these active, healthy, living soils, is to get it into the plant, which is ultimately what makes the money and pays the bills. Okay, so we'll dig in here just a little bit on source and how source fits into this whole conversation of signaling microbes and putting them to work for us. So if we're going to think of source in a very simple way, source is to microbes what the smell of fresh baked cookies is to one of us, right? Or your neighbor that has fired up his grill. That smell and attraction is really what maltolactone, the active ingredient in source, is doing to the microbes. And once they smell that and are really attracted to it, we see in a couple different studies, and I'll share them here, that their metabolism is increased, that they're increasing their amount of fixing activity when it pertains to the nitrogen fixers, and they're increasing in biomass. So we're really cranking up and ratcheting up the performance of those existing native microbes that you have in your soil and putting them to work. So to dig in just a little bit on how this looks, source is a foliar applied chemistry. So important note there, it's a chemistry, it's a molecule, synthetic molecule we've engineered. It's not alive, so we don't have the challenges of handling and managing something living in a jug. But we make a foliar application either with our herbicide, and this is corn I'll talk about here now, with a herbicide at V4 or with our fungicide at VT. Once it's applied, it gives us about a month of this increased level of activity of microbes responsible for fixing atmospheric nitrogen and solubilizing phosphorus. So depending on pH, your phosphorus oftentimes can get tied up with calcium in high pH or metals like iron and aluminum in low pH, and they need to be acted on by microbes to break those bonds and create orthophosphate, which is plant available. So how did we look at this is kind of the next natural question. And what we did is really dig into, there's a few companies that are doing a great job sequencing the soil that we all have in our fields and understanding what types of microbes and genes are expressed in those soils. So we took one, for example, here, and of a database of 70,000 nitrogenase genes, so N-fixing capable bacteria, there were 300 in the soil that we tested, and 200 of those actually increased their respiration in kind of a contained environment. So activating about 2/3 of those nitrogen fixers in any given soil. And this is kind of where I talked about the no-till or even having a diversity of crops. This number of 300, we see it get higher where we have more diversity of soils and crops that have been grown. So if we're going to kind of run with the number of 2/3, 2/3 of 500 is going to be better for our situation than 2/3 of 300. So keep that diversity up if possible. All right. So another side of this equation then is great. You know, you're activating microbes and bacteria specifically here for nitrogen. How do you know that that's getting into the plant, right? Because plants can source their nitrogen from a variety of different sources in the soil and via organic matter. So we did an experiment with N15. So might be familiar to some folks, but N15 is an isotope of nitrogen gas that's quite rare, but it does happen in natural settings. So of the nitrogen gas that we're breathing in here with every breath, only about 0.4% of that is N15, this very specific isotope. And why that matters is plants can't absorb nitrogen gas on their own, right? So if you pump a container full of nitrogen gas, it can't make its way into the plant without the soil and bacteria playing a part in that equation. So what we did here is put N15 and N14 in sealed containers. And it's important that you can actually tell N15 apart from N14 in a tissue test. So what we did is we ran an experiment where we had source with N15 in a container, and we just had a control with regular nitrogen gas in that container. And the outcome of the experiment was that we had 43% more N15 in the treated part of this trial and 35% more biomass than the untreated. So what that tells us is the only way for N15 to get into this plant tissue was through it being fixed by bacteria in the soil. So Think of N15 as like a marker. If you're going to go in and get your heart checked, you get some form of dye, and then they can take a picture of that. N15 is kind of the dye in the plant to see where that nitrogen originated. So it's very exciting to see that pathway of fixing the nitrogen within the soil made its way into the plant in that experiment. And why does this matter, right? It's kind of an interesting conversation here. I think everybody would raise their hand if I asked and could see, who wants a healthy soil, who wants an active soil. But why does that matter? It matters because there's a lot of financial opportunity to hone in on and optimize the amount of nutrients that we're applying, specifically nitrogen. So NUE is kind of a neat metric where you can really just kind of level the efficiency of nitrogen being applied in different yield environments. So I know there's some people that can grow 150 bushel of corn. There's some people that grow 300, but the amount of N it takes to make a bushel is comparable across those environments. So if you take the pounds applied divided by your bushels, that gets your NUE. And what we found is that somewhere between 0.8 and 0.9 or 0.95 seems to be the kind of peak of the return. So you've seen universities have a marginal return chart, which is kind of what's in the background here. That seems to be the peak of return where we're not giving up any yield potential, but we're also not wasting or having excess runoff of nitrogen. What we have, though, when we see a lot of and work with a lot of our customers in terms of the nitrogen that they're applying, is a lot of folks that are in around 1 or even north of 1. And that's because nitrogen gets treated as insurance, I think, in a lot of situations. And we know we want enough, and we'll err on the side of having a little extra, right? Or a lot extra. So I would just say if you're anywhere above 1, probably consider, a 10 to 25 pound reduction. If you're over 1.1, 1.2, there's probably at least 25 pounds to be able to reduce and optimize. And then source is a great way to activate the microbiome and pull in any of that naturally available form of nitrogen that you have the power of creating in your soil. So here's how this starts to look from a crop health standpoint. Over the last 2 years, we've gone and tissue tested several hundred fields, over 300 fields, and this is corn we're looking at right now, to see, okay, after a source application, what is actually being brought into the plant? Because I mentioned tissue tests is critical over just a soil test. And what we found is that source-treated fields have more nutrients really across the board. This is the average of those over 300 fields. And we're seeing more nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium by a couple percent. That's exciting. But I think what's really exciting here is some of the micronutrients that we've seen increases in tissue as well. So just creating that balance within the system, we're opening up those roots in that plant to benefit from all of the different potential nutrients in that soil versus just what we're feeding it in a mineral form. So very exciting to see some of these tissues as they correlate to yield. And that brings us back to the analogy of Liebig's law of the minimum. So we know that yield is determined by the most limiting nutrient or the most limiting factor, right? And if that's water and weather, it can be hard to solve for without tiling or irrigation. But from a nutrient standpoint, the soil can really build us a nice buffer. And we've seen that time and time again, where some of those fields that have cover crops, or they have no-till or reduced tillage, or they have source and an active microbiome, they're able to stay alive maybe a few more days in those stressful situations and increase the levels of some of these nutrients that could potentially be limiting. So when we have that balance and that nice system, we're able to not just increase yield and the economics, that is great, but we also have subsequent benefits with environmental challenges that we're facing today. So it was pretty neat. Last year, we did a trial with an organization in the Eastern Corn Belt that had individual tile outlets per replicated trials. And what we saw was that there was a decrease in the concentration of nitrates coming out of the tile lines of source treated fields. So we were better utilizing those applied nutrients, and the nitrogen that was getting fixed by bacteria was not being lost into the system. It was really close to the root. It was quickly uptaken and it was not leached. So not only did we see a decrease within treatment, but what's really exciting is we look at some of those controls, which are high nitrogen rates, probably in excess, how big the difference is when we back off that 25 to 50 pounds I just mentioned with source. We're seeing, similar yield opportunities or similar economic opportunities, but like a 30 to 40% reduction in the nitrates leaving that tile line. So very exciting to see we can win financially and environmentally as well. All right, so just a few pictures, kind of put the words that I've just been saying here into light, and what does this look like in the field? So we are seeing typically with that healthy soil, active soil, larger root systems. So bigger roots give us more access to immobile nutrients, to deeper water, to help plants stand and just weather some of those, challenging winds and things that we're facing more and more often. So we're seeing those healthier plants. It's been really neat to see the stalk diameter increases, oftentimes a 1/4 inch, which if we're, shooting for grain, is going to help with our harvestability and stand. Our silage customers are benefiting from tonnage with some of these improvements in season. And then really, adding that kernel size and depth at the end of the year. So as we're focused on yield, the more kernels, the heavier they are, the bigger they are, the more bushels that leads to at the end of the day. And that's really just from having more nutrients and more sucrose in that plant throughout the season. On soybeans, and we have other crops, so just for the sake of time here, I'll kind of talk on soybeans, but soybeans, we're seeing, some of them benefit from increased nutrition around the root zone. What this leads to on soybeans is more nodulation. So even though soybeans are capable of fixing nitrogen, they oftentimes run a deficit late in the season as they're trying to fill and put on pods because we're doing such a good job managing them, which is fine. It's a good problem to have, right? There's more yield potential there than they're capable of. So getting those nodules just as dense as possible, and then even contributing some nitrogen from free living nitrogen bacteria outside of those nodules, we've seen benefits from as well, leading to more trifoliates. Trifoliates lead to pods, and that's what drives yield and bean size at the end of the day if we have nutrition through the end of the year. All right, so just a couple examples here, tons of yield and performance examples. We could talk about this for hours, so I just grabbed a few and encourage you to get with somebody on our team to see results kind of in your state or your region. But in general, we see some pretty good performance with source, especially in those fields that are nutrient limited or challenged from pH, from soil texture, topography. You can see a few examples here from Iowa of some nice yield lifts. Typically, we see about 4 to 4.5 bushels kind of throwing the dart at the wall. But when we really focus on nitrogen response, we can start to look at some really nice ROI and yield lift as well. And here's an example of that. So this was a nitrogen reduction, which resulted only in a 2 bushel per acre yield lift, which doesn't sound very sexy. But when you think of the cost of nitrogen at somewhere around 90 cents a pound, we automatically have the economics of another 3 bushels essentially added from that cost saving. So a nice ROI is possible here when we back off some of that nitrogen, even if we maintain yield or see a smaller yield lift. So lots of our customers benefiting from this as well. Kind of last slide here on source, powered through that. So we'll have plenty of time for questions and chatting, and I can kind of dig back in to any of those items. But source is very unique in the marketplace in that we fully guarantee its performance. So we're confident that you can benefit from source, and we're so confident that we guarantee that it will pay for itself. Otherwise, we do a full money back promise. And what that looks like is with a qualifying purchase, which is 732 acres on corn or a case of corn, or 10 gallons on soybeans, which is about 512 acres. if it doesn't provide a yield lift that equals your investment, we'll write you a check back. This is a program we've used the last couple of years. It's gone over well. We've paid out every single claim that's been requested. Good news is there haven't been many because the product has worked really well for our customers. So all that's required is to leave a check strip in the field. And then our data team analyzes that and we settle up on that. But just a very nice way to get in the door at very low risk for a product like this. All right, so let's take some questions. I'm sure I've been seeing the Q&A kind of light up, so I'm sure we got a few.
Yeah, we do have some questions coming in. We have one from Larry who asked, what is the cost per acre of source?
Yeah, so cost per acre, it's about on corn $15 at the moment here. So we have purchasing discounts. First one was behind us in October. We have another one through the end of the year, so December 31st, and then one more in the spring as well. But that'd be where you're at right now, kind of a midpoint. There are some discounts available with volume beyond that as well, but that'd be a place to get the conversation started.
Another question here, how is source to be applied? How much per acre?
Yeah, so source is applied at 7/10. The source corn product, I should say, is applied at 7/10 of an ounce per acre. The soybean product is 2.5 ounces per acre. And then source DC, which is a new formulation for us, I haven't talked a ton about. That's this year going on wheat and cotton and grass hay and alfalfa. So some of our expansion crops, that's a 1 ounce formulation. So all in all, they're low use rate products, right? So less than a couple ounces. They are shelf stable, so they can sit on the shelf for a couple of years. Like I said, they're not alive, easy to use and mix on that trailer to get into the mix. So yeah, an ounce or less per acre. A gallon goes, 178 acres or something like that. So don't have to have a ton of volume with you.
Next question, was the nitrogen rate reduced in the farms or trials where source was applied?
Yes, some we do, some we don't. So I would say probably, 20 at this point, 25% of our customers consider a nitrogen reduction. And a lot of them who are already doing or using efficient levels of nitrogen are just adding it on top to boost yield and bring some more plant available nitrogen into the mix. So yeah, when I talk about like kind of that 4 to 5 bushel yield lift, typically that's in that boost scenario. When we start to reduce nitrogen, we've seen some really nice yield lifts that get well into the double digits. So just kind of depends what the scenario is. And yeah, I think I showed one of each in the examples that I showed.
Bob, I've got a question for you. In your experience, in terms of application timing, when do you think has been the best time to apply?
I feel the best time to apply is V4 to V6. At V4 to V6, if you don't have a self-propelled sprayer, you got a pull behind sprayer. It's very easy to get out there. I also like getting out there too, to go look at your crop while you're out there and see where your weed control is and everything else. But at V4 to V6, you're giving the plant time to take up all the nutrients it wants to, as it has a source on it and grow into the season. And it's amazing. Like he showed the pictures, you will see the difference of a healthier plant by the time it's in tassel.
A lot of questions pouring in. Joel wants to. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to ask that one for Joel too, Bob, because he actually had a data point on this year. So yeah, I'll jump in here, Bob. So Joel is wondering about adding source to a cover crop. And I know you saw some interesting things of a cover crop following a source treated cash crop.
Yes.
So maybe expand on that.
Yeah. So I had a friend spray it on his corn, V4 to V6 silage corn, took his silage corn off. We had a little bit better difference, in the side-by-side trial and the digestibility, a little bit of tonnage lift. But the thing was really approached him was the guys are in the cover crop. We had oats. He put oats in right after because it was an early year and was really warm. You could draw a line where the oat cover crop, where he sprayed and where it didn't spray. So the source carried on the soil to go into the next crop to keep that growing also. So it was pretty amazing to see that boost you get out of the soil.
Matthew wants to know, what about cotton? Can you source with that?
Yeah, so we do have cotton labeled for source DC for our 23 growing season. So we saw some nice increases last year, and we're just getting, you probably know that if you're asking that question, the ginning process, and it can take a little bit. So just getting some of our cotton trial data in now, but it's looking good. So stay tuned. We can get you some more information on that as we get those trials in. But yeah, seeing some nice improvement and nice ROI on that product as well.
All right. Lucas wants to know, does Source activate multiple microbes or just one kind?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the benefit of Source is that we're really activating anything that's existing in that microbiome. So we can activate a broad range of microbes. Oftentimes if you're purchasing a microbe to apply, it's a single strain or maybe just a couple. And we have the benefit of activating hundreds of strains that exist in your soil with an application. So yeah, very broadly applicable to all the strains in the soil.
Here's one from Linda. Does the recommended frequency of application, does it vary for conventional and no-till?
Yeah, so what we've seen for frequency of application is a single pass. So we've tried multiple passes, and while we increase the win rate, we don't necessarily double, the economics of making that second trip. So we recommend a single pass, either V4 or VT. It's really hard to kind of choose one of those two, though, just based on the yield lift. So they're very similar. We can see good results from V4 and VT. A lot of times for that decision, I'd probably encourage you to just look at your equipment and what makes sense. So if you're not making a fungicide pass, obviously I'd go early. If you're making both passes and you're interested in participating in our guarantee, I'd focus on one that can be mapped. Not all aerial applicators are good at mapping or provide those maps. So that'd be maybe a reason to do early, or use a self-propelled sprayer if you can do your own fungicide. But yeah, single application we've seen to work well. And V4 typically is the easier of the two, just from some of the logistics.
So where's the product available for purchase? And Maurice wants to know if he can get it in Ontario.
Yeah, so I'll answer the second part of that first. Unfortunately, not Ontario yet. We're working on that. That's on the calendar for one of these years down the road. But yeah, we sell Source through a dealer network. So we have dealers that are local to each and every one of you that sell products like this. They might sell seed, whatever it might be. And then if you're in a gap and you're not close to a dealer, we can work with you directly as well. So encourage you though, on our website sound.ag, we have a dealer locator where you can put in your zip code and you can see the dealers around you.
All right. Once again, we have about 25 minutes left for questions. So still plenty of time if you want to write your question into the Q&A control panel down there. Let's see. Mark wants to know, what is the effect of innodulation on inoculated beans? Yeah,
so we've seen, and we haven't teased apart inoculated versus not inoculated and some of the research and some of those pictures that I was showing, but we've seen an increase in nodulation with an early application on soybeans, kind of regardless of where they're at. So some of the customers we're at were inoculated. We still saw increases. So more density there kind of across the board, regardless of how they got to that point. But that's not, like I mentioned on the soybean product, that's not the only area where we see a benefit. We're also activating free living nitrogen fixers in that scenario as well. So we're getting nitrogen from outside the nodules in addition to supporting nodulation.
All right. Dan wants to know. Oh, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was kind of reading into that one. Yeah. Why not 2x2 starter? So if you think of when you plant, and I'll say like this statement here is probably Corn Belt and North. I know it's a little bit different in the South, but soil temps are just so low. So if we think when we plant, it's 50 degrees soil temp, maybe it might be 45 here in Iowa when I'm planting, and I'm hoping for it to get to 50 in a few days just because we have to force it sometimes. But the soil temp is so low that our biology is almost inactive, right? It's sleeping, it's still waking up from winter. So stimulating those and trying to activate them when there's so little productivity, we haven't seen be as effective as an in-season application. So Source moves very well within the phloem of the plant. Once we spray a foliar application, it moves right through the plant, not with the root exudates into the rhizosphere. We want that activity. we've seen that work very well. And starter, it's just so cold and so little activity. It hasn't worked as well. So good question though.
So Bob, when you're out talking to other growers, who are using this product, what kind of feedback have you gotten from them, or what are some of the big takeaways you've seen in the field?
I keep in touch with all my Excel seed for channel. So all my guys on the East Coast. We're seeing anywhere between a 13 to 15 bushel lift this year. So that was a bigger lift. We had a good dry summer, and the biggest thing I was excited about was we're seeing the yield lift when it comes, and it's coming in bushel weight. And also, I think Jeff could read prior to this too. We're seeing like when the grain comes off, it was a point drier. So, and I heard rumors of that too, that where the grain did come off out of the source application where it's drier. So, I seen it up to 2.5 to 3 bushel test weight lift in my checks, between the check and where we put the source. So, I was pretty excited about that.
Can you get it in a pint size for fruit crops?
No containers that small yet. So, and fruit crops are not on the label. It's something that we can explore. We're always interested in expanding that portfolio. So yeah, we have trial material available in smaller containers, but it's not labeled at this point. And yeah, gallon is the smallest container that we sell.
All right.
But it also has 2 years of shelf life. So
yes.
If you need to keep it, we could keep it for 2 years.
Absolutely.
How does a foliar applied product get transported down to the root zone to signal the microbes? What is the process? How long does it take? And what if it rains after the application?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So a product like this, I mean, when we spray anything, right, our goal is to absorb it into the leaf tissue. And maltolactone, the active ingredient, it mimics several different compounds that naturally occur in plants that move very freely within the plant. So we can get that translocated down quite easily after an application. And this is where it's always good too, when you're spraying source, in a standard kind of spray mix, to have some kind of a surfactant or even, that water softened with a little nitrogen in it, just to get it to absorb into that leaf. So we don't have just cold, hard water sitting on a leaf where it's not absorbed and it's trying to evaporate. But once we get it in the plant, very quickly moves and translocates down through exudates, because like I said, it mimics some natural compounds that move freely within the plant. And this doesn't take very long. Just a couple of days, we start to see activity in that root zone, and it lasts for, upwards of potentially a month. So rain fast is really just after it's dried on the leaf. So hour, 2 hours, kind of just depending on what time of day you sprayed it. If it rains after the application or after that period, it's fine. It's still going to have its effect within the microbiome. So.
Another cover crop related question here. Do you advise spraying source on a cover crop in mid to early spring, about 4 to 6 weeks before corn planting?
That's something that we haven't vetted. So sounds like it could be an interesting trial, but I haven't personally tried that within any of our research. So I don't have that much time. I have to kill my cover crop and then plant my corn here in Iowa. So a wider window might give you an opportunity to try that.
All right, getting to some more questions here. It says you recommended foliar application. Can it be applied as a seed treatment?
Yeah, it's foliar at this point is our path. And that's because that activity, we want to hit those microbes when soil temps are high and they're most productive and most active, which is, call it June, July, and August. So at this point, not to say never, but at this point, the active has shown its best efficacy with a mid-season foliar application.
All right.
Should we, and we can maybe get back into those questions. We should maybe give Bob the floor a little bit to talk about his experience and have some of that conversation.
Yeah, definitely. Take it away, Bob.
So my experience is we came off of last year, the year before, with astronomical amount of rain, anywhere between 33 to 39 inches of rain we had. I farm a lot of gravel soils, but I farm a lot of poor ground too. So all my soybeans went on my poorer ground this year, and with the fertilizer prices where they were, we had a lot of nutrients left over from last year. We just didn't use. The corn plant was not doing well. So I had excellent luck putting source on my beans, seeing the yield lift on the beans too. And they just looked healthier. The root systems were better all summer. I mean, both corn and beans, you could see the roots. You could do root digs all summer long, see the difference. So I really had a lot of good luck putting on my beans, seeing that lift. Being in the corn, I wanted to cut back on nitrogen this year, just because at the price of nitrogen was. So we dropped max 180 units out for corn on my good ground. I went 140 on the ground that wasn't as good. And we seen yields up to 210. I had a 200 acre field, go 215 bushel. So we got our lift out of that, and seen yields up to 240 bushel out of there. So I think it was a home run for me for both. I didn't mind going back. It was an extra pass to go back over. I like to throw sometimes, in the check we didn't do it, but I like to throw foliar feed in there too if I'm going to go back over and try to keep that plant keep going. I mean, the more you can keep putting something on your plant, the better plant's going to do. So in the end, like I said, it was just a great way. I mean, the bottom line too, some farmers don't have maybe I got my own way wagon. I think sometimes we get caught up in it where we're going out for yield monitors. I don't know if the yield monitors are going to pick up the bushel weight as good as they could, but I seen too where a guy, you drive down the end of the row and you turn the corner and your bin alarm goes off, you're full, and then you went through the check. It kind of did the same thing. He's like, well, Earl, you didn't do nothing for me. But until you put that in a scale and weigh up and see your bushel weight difference, you could be up 3 pounds in a combine. You're up 3,000, you're up 1,000 pounds of weight in that bin. So it's really showing. So I think if you really need for farmers to look at it, you need to get a weigh wagon out there if you could. It's nice. I mean, I have climate in my machine too, but it's really nice to get an accurate weigh wagon to see what it exactly doing for you in yield lifts. That's my experience.
Yeah, it's great. What I don't know if we covered it, but what got you first interested in source, and kind of tell us about your journey from being interested in source to seeing good results. Everybody has a different appetite for taking on, new products and new things. Just how did you get to where you are now?
So actually I got a call because I win a lot of awards in New York for farming, and I got a call from Amy, our director in the East, to try to see if I'd be interested in selling it, trying it. And once I talked to her, I got pretty excited about the product because, like you said, I know where fertilizer prices are going, where they were last year. So that got me excited to try it. I have a felt belt sprayer. I spend a lot of time respraying my fields in a year, putting out foliar products. So that was like a home run. I said, let's try this out and go. I did try some other products last year too. Didn't have as much luck with the other companies' products. So I had really good luck with Source, and with the price, at earlier it was like $13.50, I think. So with the price, it wasn't a bad gig to get on there. And so we put it on all of the corn except the check strips, and we applied all the beans. I just grew 500 acres of corn this year and 700 acres of beans, and just saw the results for the whole year. I said, with all the root digs, I had a lot of support. Amy came out with a couple of agronomists, and we had a lot of support to go out and check the fields during the course of the summer and watch how everything progressed. So that was exciting. We're on trial. I do grow grain sorghum, milo. We're on trial to do a trial of that this year on my farm. So I'm excited about that also, and see where that could lead, and try to do nutrient management and getting a better yield bump on that also.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So obviously looking at milo, but what else is next for, and this could be beyond source. What are you looking to try, operationally in the next year or two? Is it products? Is it equipment? Is it a practice?
I think we're a couple of guys, me and a couple of my customers, we're all excited about the wheat product you guys are coming out with. We're putting on wheat. So we're excited about pushing our wheat yield. So we had a 95 bushel yield last summer. It was great. But I think it's just where it's at today. I think the microbiology is where we're headed, get not just microbe or ours is a chemistry, but trying the whole future of the plant is going through the microbes and getting that's where the future is going to be. And I don't know, tillage practices are all over the board. Some guys are speed tilling, high speed disking and stuff. I'm still strip till and no till seems to work the best for us. But we have to make multiple passes. With our nitrogen situation, we have we can only hold 28, 30 units of nitrogen in our soil and our gravel soils. We have a low CEC. So we have to make multiple passes. So I white drop 2 passes. So I'm actually making sometimes 4 to 5 passes through my corn if I'm putting down a fungicide. But they'll note this year was kind of hold back to maybe put out a fungicide this year. And we're in a valley that has a lot of pressure. We anthracnose pressure and stuff. And it was really important to go out, and I'm glad I went out. My dealer talked me to go out and spray it, because on a drier year, you think, we're not going to get any issues. It's too dry, but the plant's so much more stressed out in a dry year. Where I sprayed my fungicide, we didn't do it all. We did it on half the crop. It was just a huge difference. So I think sometimes just never give up and keep trying.
It's great. It's perfect. Yeah, we could, I guess, anything else you want to add, or we could jump back into questions and folks can fire in questions.
Yeah, there's more questions. Like I said,
Okay.
I think, it's an easily used product. It's an extra pass sometimes if you want to get out there early, but if you, like I said, you can put it out there. If you're going to go and fungicide, you can put it out later. I just decided to put it out earlier because I wanted to try. I thought in the trials, I seen a little bit more benefit of nitrogen savings to put it out early. So that's what drove me to go out there and spray a little bit earlier.
For sure.
All right, let's take some questions.
Yeah, any of those questions jump out, Jeff, that you want to
Yeah,
tackle?
I'll I got it open now, so I'll just kind of work through it here since we don't have any more slides to cover. So yeah, Joe was asking if we've I think we did that one for a cover crop only. There's what I was after, Tom's. So yeah, we actually have grass hay and alfalfa on the label for the DC product for 2023. So Tom was wondering if we could apply to there. So yeah, we've seen increases in tonnage, which is great. We've also seen increases in nutritional value in some of those indices. So yes, labeled DC, source DC is labeled for grass hay and alfalfa applications. Yeah, we kind of talked about treating cover crops. I haven't tried it specifically in trials, but I think there's definitely some promise there. Would this improve water use efficiency, more yield for the same amount of water? This is a tough question, right? Like it takes rain to make grain, no matter what the opportunity is. I think what we saw this year is in some areas that had kind of a light drought stress. So it can't keep things alive if it doesn't rain for a month. But in areas where a light drought stress, we saw some of those source treated plants hang on just a little bit longer, maybe to the next rain. And I think why some of that is the increase in root mass, maybe accessing some deeper water by having that energy in the root system. So yeah, I mean, maybe very subtle instances of increasing water use efficiency from some of our customers that have given us that feedback this year.
Yeah, if that was something in soybeans, when we did our check on our soybeans, the root was down about 3 inches deeper in your main tap root. So that's a huge difference on a dry year.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that. Absolutely. Somebody was wondering if we've applied with other biologicals. So yeah, we actually have lots of our customers that do this. I'm always amazed at the never-ending trials that some of our farmer customers are willing to do on their own farms, but as well as some others. So yeah, we've seen some success of stacking, source and other biological products. So it's not always 1 + 1 = 3, but it seems like it might be 1 + 1 = 2.5. And there's some interesting kind of symbiotic relationship between kind of adding diversity or adding biomass of a certain strain and then stimulating what's there for native strains as well. So yeah, there is some positive results with the combination of products there. Tim was wondering if we could run through irrigation pivots. We've trialed this now for 3 years and have had success all 3 years. So the limitation, I think, is there's a couple things. Number one, it's such a low use rate that we just have to have some equipment to make sure that we're able to dose that correctly going into the system. Because you think of 600 gallons going by a minute and then trying to sneak 0.7 of an ounce per acre in there, it can be hard. So if there's a good system in place to do that, it works fine. We also need to make sure we're getting coverage on the plant. So the mode of action, we want coverage on the plant to then get into the plant and make its way with the root exits down into the microbiome. Wouldn't work good in an irrigation system where we're just getting water on the ground. So if we got drops and bubblers and efficiency systems in that way, they're not good at getting coverage on a plant, which is where the mode of action works best. So with all that said, it can work, but there's just lots of different combinations of equipment to make it work. So canola, question from Cam. Yes, we've tried canola for 2 years. That's probably going to be the next crop that we get on the label. So it's looking good so far. More to come there, getting those results in from this year, but pretty excited about what we're seeing in canola. Seeing about increased respiration, breaking down cover crop residue. Typically, breakdown of residue is carried out by some of the larger species of microbes. So not as much, the bacteria and some that we're activating, but inevitably, once that whole system is activated, there's probably the potential to crank up the energy and do that. But we don't market source as a residue digester or some of those type of products, simply activating underneath the soil. So if residue has been incorporated, there's probably potential, but it's not specifically designed to help break it down. Last one, 2 more maybe. Does the product stimulate bacteria or also stimulate mycorrhizal fungi growth and activity? So great question. So bacteria, we've definitely studied the most. Mycorrhizal fungi are very interesting and very beneficial. They can actually use like a mucus, it's called hyphae, where it actually can extend the reach of a root and pull in phosphorus from a greater distance than just a standard root. So we think there's potential there for increased stimulation of mycorrhizal fungi, which is awesome because more phosphorus from kind of a further reach, so to speak, is going to be beneficial for the plant. But we're learning about that. It's hard, obviously, to do some of these experiments, but yes, there's potential there. So thanks for that question. And the last one is it okay to tank mix with a herbicide? So yes, this product very tank mix compatible. You can go in the tank with a herbicide, with a fungicide. The only thing that we can't do is go in with just pure UAN. So the pH is too high of just a straight UAN, which most people wouldn't use that foliar anyways. So it's typically not an issue. Just maybe on wheat applications, just to have to be careful what you're doing there. But yeah, we've seen great compatibility. And I think the question came up earlier about the new formulations. So I'll kind of answer that within this question here about tank mixing. The new formulations are just designed to have a better surfactant package, so they're easier to pour. So where traditionally we had some oil-based formulations, these ones are now surfactant and water-based. So they pour much, much better, easier to measure, less jug rinsing, which I'm excited about. Probably Bob is too, being on the spray trailer. So those should be pretty easy to handle and yes, very compatible.
All right, it looks like those are all the questions we have. Jeff or Bob, anything else you'd like to add before we start to wrap things up here?
I guess probably we'll have, this time of year is fun for me because we get tons of results. And I do see one question at the beginning, I'll go back to it. But third-party trials, I'm getting that stuff in on a daily basis at this point. So yeah, probably have an update coming here, in the next month, sometime we get all these end of year trials. Some of them are paid third-party trials. Some of them are a couple 12, 13 university trials that we'll be happy to share on different crops. So lots of data coming, which I'm excited about.
The only thing I got to add is I think in my success of being farming is trying different things. If we don't try, we never could learn. I mean, like Einstein said, if you want something to change, you got to make a change and to try things. And I think Source is a good spot to really try something on the farm and give it a chance and see. I really think, you know, we had a great look this year of everybody having success. And I think, like you said, to get a better return on your investment, it's a good spot to look at.
Appreciate it.
All right. Anything else, Jeff?
That does it for me. Yeah. Thanks for listening, everybody. And I'll let you wrap it up.
Yeah, great stuff there from Jeff and Bob. Really appreciate them joining us today. And if you missed anything or you want to go back and watch the presentation, we will have the entire recording made available on the No-Till Farmer website, also YouTube page as well. So if you want to go back and review it or share it with a member of your crew or neighbors or anyone else, you'll receive an email within 48 hours of the recorded presentation. So keep an eye on your inbox for that. And on behalf of Jeff, Bob, Sound Agriculture, and No-Till Farmer, thank you for joining us for today's digital demo. Please feel free to reach out, let us know what you thought of the live event, and if there are any topics you'd like us to cover in future webinars. And thanks again, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.